Good morning, everyone. Guys, the game is set. Prepare to endure. I don't know if you guys have noticed or not, but we have been sleepwalking into an absolute totalitarian state. What I'm going to do in this video, guys, I'm going to tell you about what's been happening in the Middle East, what's been happening in Ukraine. I'm going to tell you the advances that have been made. I'm going to tell you the rhetoric. I'm going to tell you about the nuclear test and how I do actually see this as nuclear war on the actual nuclear war on the horizon. I'm going to tell you the steps that are going to be taken towards that. But before we go on to all of that, guys, I want to give you a quick recap of the absolute insanity that's been happening in the United Kingdom at the moment. I'm going to talk about the Southport monster and how absolute insane things have been happening with that. We're also going to talk about the laws that have been passed and how Kemi Badenoch's move as leader of the Conservative Party just means now that we have no hope in the United Kingdom. There's no hope of any semblance of normality. We are literally sliding into a totalitarian state. Now, I don't know if these guys have got George Orwell's 1984 and they're just going off it as per, using it as a manual. But it wouldn't surprise me if very soon we had to have TVs with a little camera on and Keir Starmer could have a look and see what everybody is doing as and when he chooses. And if you know what, he wants us all to wear a blue t-shirt, we're going to wear a blue t-shirt. And if he wants us all to wear a red t-shirt, we're going to all have to wear a red t-shirt. But right now, it looks like our water capacity's collapsed. Our food production capacity has collapsed. And it looks like very soon the war on accommodation, the war on, living places, it looks like that's collapsed. And once that has collapsed, we are all dependent on the state. And once we're all dependent on the state, that means that, guess what? The states are in charge. They tell you to jump, you say how high. That's the reality of where we're going. So what are we going to start with, guys? Let's start with what's been happening in South. Well, I'll just go onto the share screen now, guys, and I'll just share this with you. So this is an article, I think this is from the 31st of October. Now, let's just read this headline here, guys. I think I'll be okay with that. I'll miss out this key word here. So ministers should have known within hours about what was found in this guy's home. So, guys, can you remember, as I can, when Keir Starmer went and he laid that wreath? Can you remember how he was cold? He didn't say anything. This gives this a whole new context now, doesn't it? This puts this whole incident in a new context. If this article is true, ex-counter-terror officer says failure to tell ministers when discovered at this guy's home was made would have been a serious error. So now, obviously, we don't know what the ministers have been told. We're not going to subscribe. We don't know what the ministers have been told, and we can never know. And this will be hidden in security. It will be hidden in depths of paperwork and legislation. But can you remember, like I can? Can you remember, guys? And I can see this so vividly. I can remember when Keir Starmer was walking up to lay a wreath and he was getting heckled, quite rightly so, even more so now. And he was being heckled by members of the public. Can you remember that? When he laid that wreath down, did he know? As I suspect he did know. I struggle, guys, I struggle to believe that he didn't know what was found at this guy's house. I struggle to believe he didn't understand the depths and the enormity. As the article says, they would have known within hours. So let me just contextualize this now. People have been sent to prison for spreading misinformation. Now, I'm just going to speculate here, guys, and I'm not going to talk about that incident at all because that would get me in the gulag. So let's just total hypothetical situation now, guys. This has got nothing to do with anything we've just mentioned, and it's certainly got nothing to do with anything in the media at the moment. Let's just say, for example, if there's an incident in the United Kingdom right now, and I don't know, mainstream media are reporting this to be a Christian attack on somewhere. And then it turns out that, you know, there's people in the community are saying, no, this wasn't a Christian attack. It wasn't Christians attacking this place. It was something else. And then all those people then get sent to prison for misinformation, spread of misinformation, because it wasn't a Christian attack. And then if it comes down the line that, hang on a minute, those people who were saying things originally, what they were saying is actually right. That is correct, what they were saying. That changes the whole concept of those people being sent to prison, because now you could have a situation where the initial people who were saying that this was a Christian attack, they were actually spreading misinformation. So everybody who's repeated that line that this was a Christian attack, and again, guys, this is just a total hypothetical scenario. This has got no relevance to anything that has happened or may happen in the future. This is a totally hypothetical thought exercise. Now, those people initially who were saying it was a Christian attack and, you know, anybody else is getting sent to jail, if it comes out now that that is actually wrong and that is not the case at all, are those people, now we've got a switcheroo, are those people going to be let out of jail, let out of prison, and actually given a pardon and given compensation? And are those media outlets that were pumping the narrative, the false narrative initially, are those people going to be sent to prison? Are the mainstream media news anchors now going to be sent to prison because all they were doing is sharing information that was given to them? Can you see the slippery slope we're on right now? Can you see it now, the slippery slope that we're on? You know, our BBC presenters, because they repeated a narrative that they believe to be true, are they going to be sent to prison? Or are we going to go back to source? So who gave them the information? Do you see the slippery slope that we're on now, guys? And it doesn't end anywhere well. Also, while we're on this subject, did you not notice the draconian laws that were passed in 2020 that gave the governments the abilities to, you know, make it illegal to go to a park with your children? The draconian laws that made it legal to close places. Can you remember the footage of people at funerals and they were not allowed to sit together? Well, it's come out now that this could be misinformation. So are those people going to be, is there, you see where I'm going with this, guys? The law, like I said at the beginning of this video, guys, the game is set now. All the laws are in place. All the laws are in place to subdue a population for whatever's coming. So for whatever's coming now, guys, you know, these guys can use legislation that was passed in 2020 to lock people down. They can use legislation that was passed in 2020 to stop protests. They can just stop protests now, you know, and that is legal. And remember in 2020 and 2021, there was a certain amount of protests that were allowed to go on. And then there were other protests that were just not allowed to go on. So, you know, you can see now how the government can close people down. And none of this is illegal now. This is all legal. In our live stream, I think on Friday's live stream, we talked about this. We talked about how if the government pass laws and make things legal, then that's legal. We have no say over that. And I gave the example of something ridiculously like, you know, I think it was like if the government pass a law to say that the firstborn has to be sent to a workers' camp for 10 years or something like that, you know, something absolutely ridiculous. Now, if that is passed into law, it becomes legal for you to do that. And we have no mechanism in the United Kingdom. We have no mechanism to resist that, only voting. Now, we've got a situation in the United Kingdom where we're not going to get another vote for 5 years. And if Kemi Badenoch, guys, I'll come on to Kemi Badenoch in a minute, but, you know, nothing good is happening with all these things. The draconian laws that have been passed, the draconian laws that have been passed in 2020 through, I'd say, through to today, whereby we can put people in jail for online posts. We can put people in jail for sharing information that they believe to be true. Now, I would say that that should be replicated, and that should be replicated to mainstream media news outlets, you know, and the news anchors that are, you know, that are reading things off a teleprompter. You know, they, in this circumstance, they can't hide behind that. Oh, guys, I thought I was just reading off a teleprompter. Yeah, do you know what? People who were sharing things online, they were sharing things that they thought to be true as well. You know, we can't have one rule for one and another rule for another. It doesn't work like that. And this is why we're just going to see the breakdown of society as more and more people wake up to what is actually happening. And as more people look and think, hang on a minute, these laws that were passed in 2020, these have not been dissolved. They're still here. You know, people can still use these laws. Look at certain people being arrested under certain legislation that's not applicable to them. You know, the government can the government can police. You know, can police this politicizing. Sorry, the government can politicize policing, and you know we have no say over that. We really don't. And now Kemi Badenoch is the leader of the opposition. Nothing good is going to come of this, guys. Kemi Badenoch's husband, as I understand it, Hamish Badenoch, I think he's owner or he's part owner of a huge, the big company that does private rentals. Well, guess what? We're having a war on private landlords. We are. I've given many videos on this, guys. We have got a war right now on private landlords owning, like, by private landlords. What I mean is, in your family, if you're, I don't know, you're now, you move in with you meet a new partner, you move in together, you decide to rent her house out, or you decide to rent your boyfriend's house out. You just because of your situation, you've got two houses, you know, you're halfway paying the mortgage. You think, you know what, we're not going to sell, we're actually going to rent that out. You know, that's the war that we're having. You know, people owning and having the ability to make money for themselves. Now, Kemi Badenoch's husband, that's what they do. So as we see this war on the private rental sector, as we see this war on food production, as we see the war that's already been lost on food, on water, you know, water supply. Who's going to buy all these houses? Who is going to be buying the houses in the United Kingdom that are, you know, that will be going cheap? Because who's going to buy these houses? Who's going to buy them? Because you can't rent them out because there's no incentive. So who's going to buy them? Is it going to be the local people, or is it going to be those big companies who can afford, you know, who can afford to take the hit because they know in 4 years' time, in 5 years' time, in the 2 years' time, whenever a sufficient time has passed, because guess what? They're on the inside, like Kemi Badenoch's husband, you know, they're on the inside. They know, listen, guys, if we invest this much money now, the government are going to change the policy in 3 years, and then we're going to get all this money back once we've got a controlling share of the market. Once there's a controlling share of the market, you have no ability to dictate prices. You know, it just becomes impossible. So, guys, nothing good I don't see is happening in the United Kingdom at the moment. What we need to do, I wanted Jenrick to be, you know, I wanted Jenrick to win, but unfortunately he didn't. What this is going to mean is the rise in reform. But reform are not going to be able to do anything, guys, because the political system, it's the political system that is broken. So, guys, that is kind of it in a nutshell in the United Kingdom at the moment. Draconian laws that have been passed, draconian laws that have been passed in 2020 through to today, and that they are being selectively upheld, as in within the context that, you know, these are being investigated selectively on what part of that, you know, that political spectrum you're on. And, you know, remember right at the beginning of the video, guys, this incident in, you know, in Southport, it's absolutely disgusting. There needs more media attention onto it. There needs to be, I want to know, was Keir Starmer briefed when he laid that wreath? Guys, go and look. I'll put a video to it at the end of this video, guys, in the description. Go and look at that video. Please go and watch that video and look at his face. Look at his face and make your own mind up. You know, did he know what had happened? Did he know what had been found at this guy's house? I don't know. I genuinely don't think we'll ever know. But that will change the whole concept of this. And if guys, I don't think people understand the enormity of this, and I think it is being washed over by the media. But the enormity of that would show vast levels of corruption, vast levels of contempt for the general public. If he knew when he laid that wreath, and he subsequently went out and put in these draconian measures to send people to prison who were saying certain things online, guys. I think I'll do another video on it, but the levels of contempt there are absolutely huge. Again, I'll be fair. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe I'm just misreading the room. Maybe I'm not seeing something, but that's, kind of my perception of it at the moment. Let me know what you guys think in the comment, guys. All right. And anyway, so we'll go straight now to international news. We'll go straight to what's been happening in Russia. I was going to say the Soviet Union then. It's not the Soviet Union anymore. It's Russia. So Russia fires missiles to simulate massive response to a nuclear attack. So a lot of people have been sending me messages saying, are we going to get, is there going to be a nuclear attack? Is there going to be a nuclear response? Is there going to be nuclear war? And I've said, many videos, I've said, guys, I don't see that on the cards right now. Now, I don't know why that is. I don't know whether that's, I've said, maybe it's aliens have come down and aliens have said that we're not allowed to have a nuclear war because we're actually descendants from Mars and something happened on Mars and there was a nuclear war on Mars and we had to leave here. I've gone through some really wild theories. What could be the case is Russia didn't have a sufficient nuclear capacity. Yes, Russia was the biggest nuclear superpower, but in the context that, and I've said this many times before, if you have a car breaker's yard, you can claim you have 170 cars, but you don't really. You have like 170 bodies of cars and shells of cars, and you have 170 chassis, and you have maybe 50 engines and 30 tires and 60 gearboxes. You see where I'm going with this, guys, all right? Yes, you do technically have 170 cars, but the reality is you don't have a car that you can put on the street that will pass its MOT and you can go and get it taxed. You don't have one of those. So what I said is in the Cold War, the height of the Cold War, you had Russia testing nuclear missiles and America testing nuclear missiles. Now this is not just to rattle the saber, which inevitably that will do. What these nuclear tests do, it's confirmation for the technicians and the scientists that they can actually make one detonate, because it's not as easy as some people think. It's not as easy as you can't go into the big old the big old silo and say, right, those three there, let's crack them off. Doesn't work like that. There's material inside these things that decay over time. There's material in these things that, you have to keep refurbishing. You have to keep it really potent. Now, not least of those materials is tritium. Now, tritium is ridiculously expensive to produce. It's ridiculously expensive to store. So I would say the Russians don't have a sufficient supply of tritium. I'm speculating that, guys. Now, I know a lot of gas production was in the old Soviet Union. It was in a place called, I think, Kremenchuk in Ukraine. Now, in Kremenchuk in Ukraine, where do I go with this? Let me see what time are we on, guys? Because I'm conscious this might be a long video. Right, we'll just go into it. So I think it's Kremenchuk in Ukraine, there was huge gas. There was a huge facility built by the Soviet Union to produce different types of gas. Now, I know that the main one there, I think it's xenon. Now, they produce xenon because they thought that the next conflict would be used with lasers. So the Soviet Union, invested heavily in xenon production. You need xenon in lasers. Unfortunately, I think like a huge amount of the world's xenon production that you need for lasers is produced in that region. Now that region that's stopped now, so that's going to have a knock-on effect. Guys, I'm going off topic. Tritium for nuclear weapons, right? It's very difficult to produce. I don't believe that the Russians have a sufficient supply of tritium. So therefore, they're going to have to, really, really, really get that, get that tritium from somewhere. Now, whether they're producing that themselves or whether that's coming from a third party, we don't know. But until they get a sufficient tritium supply, I don't think that we're going to see nuclear testing. However, what we have seen recently is the Russians, and I'll come to the share screen on this, guys, because we've seen the Russians test firing, ICBMs, I guess, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which is one of the ways that you could deploy nuclear missiles. Russia fires missiles to simulate massive response to a nuclear attack. So the summary from this one, guys: Putin kicks off strategic nuclear exercise. Russia tests triad of ground, sea, and air-launched missiles. Putin says geopolitical risks are rising. Russia test-fired missiles over distances of thousands of miles on Tuesday to simulate a massive nuclear response to an enemy's first strike. Now, of course, they're saying that. Now, when we're talking about nuclear, when you're talking about nuclear war, it's kind of one of those things that whoever goes biggest, fastest will win. So if Russia were to strike NATO first and hit all NATO ports, all known NATO, and they are known, all NATO known missile silos, any capacity basically for the West to strike Russia back, then NATO, then they would say, right, guys, they would say to London or Washington, right, guys, we've taken out your defenses. Do you want to surrender or do you want another barrage? And guess what? The leaders would say, okay, we'll surrender and we'll start teaching. We'll change our language to Russian. That's that's kind of what happened. I don't see any defense to this. Especially to these, if it's going to be a full force nuclear attack. What people think is that a nuclear strike would be like a low yield, like what we saw in Japan, basically at the end of the Second World War. I see if a country was to do a nuclear strike, they would know they're going to get struck back. So what they would do is they would either go big or kind of not at all. Now the build up towards that would be in-country tests. So that would be tests that these guys would do in country. They would have to test their own systems. And the first thing that you would do is make sure your delivery method is working. Now, the Russians have tested that. The Russians have got really good rocket capacity. The Russians have got, they've been doing launches up to the International Space Station. So the long-range capacity for Russia's missiles, that's not in question. Nobody can question that. It's not in question. You should just take it as a given that the Russians can put a ballistic missile anywhere on the Earth within 90 minutes or something. So that's kind of where we are with the Russian long-range missile system. The Russians have this in sufficient quantity, so nobody can intercept these. If the Russians send 50 rockets, each rocket would have a number of payloads. These payloads would have decoy payloads. It would be very difficult to intercept. Now, what you would see normally is in the increase in the moving forwards, you would see you'd see these countries start to test nuclear, start to test their nuclear system. So whether that's a low yield tactical nuclear weapon, whether that's a strategic nuclear weapon, you would see these things happen next. Now, these would happen, I think. They have to happen if there's any risk of a nuclear conflict. So maybe for you guys who are watching this and you're thinking, right, okay, what's going to happen? You've got to take this into context. If you start to see countries using nuclear weapons and testing nuclear weapons, then that for me would be a trigger that things have escalated to a new level. And you get people saying, oh, they wouldn't let the people, the Russians wouldn't let people know it's coming. The Russians wouldn't let wouldn't let anyone know that these things are coming. They kind of have to, guys. It's not as simple as just being able to press a button and these things going into the sky. You need technicians, you need engineering capacity, you need metallurgy, you need a lot of engineering to make one of these go kaboom. I think the first ones, if they are fired, I think the first ones won't be fired on a missile. They won't be fired off a submarine. They won't be air launched. What will happen is they will be driven in trucks, you know, into a location. I thought it would have been the Kursk region, you know, but you will see these driven into a location. Like I said, I think it would have been, I thought it would have been the Kursk region. If the Russians had have used nuclear weapons in the Kursk region, you would have had a situation where Russia would have been able to tick a lot of boxes. They would have been able to show the West they're willing to use these systems. They would have been able to show the West that they have the capacity to use these systems. But also, because the Russians used them on their own soil, then they wouldn't have warranted a strike in, you know, they wouldn't have warranted this conventional strike that NATO have threatened. So NATO have threatened Russia, if they use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, then the NATO, led by the United States, would take out all the air defenses and all the assets that Russia has conventionally with airstrikes. So that's not going to be a good day for the Russians, and everybody knows not to mess with the US Air Force. Remember, guys, the world's largest air force is the United States Air Force. The world's second largest air force is the United States Navy. So there's no one who can compete or comprehend or, you know, even attempt to defend against that onslaught. Now, what could be happening is Putin could be waiting until the US election, until, you know, Donald Trump wins. I don't see any way without cheating that Donald Trump can't win. Now, maybe that's just me. I mean, Kamala Harris as having, she had, what's her name? Jennifer Lopez come up and support her. Now, Jennifer Lopez used to go out with Puff Daddy. So are we supposed to trust Jennifer Lopez's judgment? I mean, if you really couldn't make it up. And then she's having a load of actors and actresses saying, I'm an actor. I'm paid to say things that are not true. Please believe me. It's just insane. I don't see any way if the US election is fair, and if it's fair, I don't see any way how Donald Trump can't win. We've already been seeing wild things. I mean, how dystopian. Can you remember there's that movie? It's the Lego movie. What's it? And what's like? There's the Lego movie. I don't know if you guys have seen it or not. And there's this thing, and it's like octopus or something. I can't remember the company, but they do everything, oil, voting machines, you know, and they're like, whoa, hang on a minute. Do you not think there's a conflict of interest here? Voting machines, computers. Guys, really? Is that what we're doing in America right now? We have voting machines. This is so wild. And to me, like, if somebody said to me, Sean, how would you rig an election? I'd say, well, I'd use a voting machine and then just, you know, change the algorithm in the background. And like, if I'm the managing director of that company and my technicians do it, who's to know, really? I mean, who can get that information? I don't know how it works in the United States, guys. I don't know how secure those voting machines are. I don't know if those voting machines have some sort of blockchain attached to them. I really don't know. But to me, having voting machines is just wild. At least in the United Kingdom, we have a ballot paper, and you can count that. You can literally count them, and you have a piece of paper, and it's very difficult to, you know, and of course, you know, there's the mail-in vote. There are problems in the United Kingdom. But guys, also, guys, I'm going slightly off topic here, but I didn't realize that in the United States, in California, they've just passed a law that says you don't have to show any identification to vote. What? Like, how is that? Like in the United Kingdom, when you go and vote, you go in, you say your name, and then you'll cross your name off. That your name will get crossed off a booklet or your voter. I think it is called the voter register. You know, you go into a room in the United Kingdom. So if you're not from the United Kingdom, when you go to vote, it all happens on one day, which is what I think should happen. You go into a room, there'll be somebody sat there. They'll say, "What's your name and address?" You give them your name and address, and they just cross that off. They say, yeah, this person has voted. Now, then you go into a booth, you get a ticket, and it will have all the candidates on. You put a cross on whoever you want to win, and then you put that in the ballot box. Your name's been crossed off to say you voted. So obviously, if you go back in to vote and your name's already been crossed off, then obviously that's something's not right there. Something's not happened. Now, I think you should in the United Kingdom have to take in ID. I don't think in the United Kingdom you should be able to vote by mail. I think, listen, you know what? I've actually traveled back from 2016. I traveled back from Ukraine so I could vote in the in the referendum. So I think if people want to vote, we should just say, look, we're not going to do mail-in vote. We're not going to do any other type of voting. If you want to say in how your country's run, you come back and you show your ID, you show your passport or your driver's license, you go into your voting booth and you vote, on the piece of paper. That's how we do it. I don't see any other way, guys. I don't see these voting machines. Anyway, guys, sorry, I'm waffling. But yeah, in the United States, in California, it's illegal to even show identification when you go to vote. So that has, you could rig that really easy. And the problem is you've no way to tell. There's no way of telling whether whether that's been rigged or not. So the Russians have started to test their nuclear triad. They've started to test these things, and this is what you would see moving forwards towards a nuclear conflict. So there's also, we've got this situation where we've got the North Korean troops that are being held in, they're being held where we're told that there's North Korean troops in the Kursk region. Again, we don't know what's happening with that. I'm going to suspect, this is me just suspecting, guys, I'm going to suspect that these North Korean troops are not going to be really combat effective. I don't think they're going to be really competent because they've not had the level of training. They've not had the level of exposure. They've not had the level of, I think exposure is the right word to use. They've not had the level of exposure. And by exposure, I don't just mean battlefield exposure. I mean media exposure. So think about it now. If you're in the United Kingdom, and you are a soldier, you're in the military, you're a recruit, you're contemplating joining the military, which, guys, I would obviously recommend. I'm ex-military, and it opened a lot of doors for me when I left the military. Now, if you're in the West and you're looking at global conflicts, you can go online and you can find how these guys are fighting. You can see what's happening with drones. You can see what tactics the Russians are using. You can see what kit and equipment these guys are using. The geopolitical situation. The political climate. In North Korea, they don't have that exposure. So it's not just battlefield exposure the North Koreans don't have. They don't have media exposure. And I do think that plays a part. Remember what I say in all my videos, guys. Nothing is hidden anymore. We can't hide things. All the information is out there. Everything that you want to know about anything is out there. The problem is there's so much disinformation, misinformation, things that are just absolutely false. I watched a video. I was going to show it, but I wasn't sure if it's authenticity. There was a video of like some they claim to be North Korean troops. I think in somewhere on the border, and they get a drone attack by I'm going to assume the Ukrainians. I don't know. I mean, people are saying this is North Koreans in Ukraine. There's nothing on that video that says to me those guys are North Koreans in Ukraine. I mean, I don't even, it could be anywhere in the world, guys, really. I mean, there's nothing, but, as time moves forwards, these things will come out. I've already been hearing non-confirmed reports from Ukraine about wild things happening. I can't talk about them on this platform, but as soon as I see something come out on the mainstream media, I will say, guys, or not even the mainstream media. As soon as I see something come out there on, even if it's a fringe media outlet, I will share that with you guys and I'll say, I think this is happening. But, until that happens, I can't really talk about it because it just comes out as misinformation. The video gets flagged and it gets taken down and I feel sad. Anyway, but what you can pretty much guarantee with the North Koreans, over time, they will get better. So the first iteration of 12,000 North Korean troops, again, we don't know how they're going to act. They may be really good. I don't think so, but we'll see. But the first contingent of North Korean troops, I would suspect they're not going to be very good. But over time, they will learn. And those things that those guys are learning, guess what? They're going to learn from Hard Knocks. They will learn those things, and they will talk to their, they'll talk to their other guys, and they'll brief their other guys up, and they will get better over time. Now, what I want to talk about now is risk appetite, because I see a lot of people saying the Russians don't care about their soldiers and the Russians don't care. And it's kind of true, but it's also not true as well. So I just want to dispel a few myths here, guys. Do the Russians care about their troops? Yes and no again. And what I mean by that is the Russians have a lot bigger risk appetite, than the West would. So their risk appetite, they would say, right, okay, we're going to attack this position. We're going to lose a lot of people. Are we going to take the position? Yes, right, go and take it. And they will do that. Whereas the West would look at this, NATO would look at this, and they would say, look, we're not happy to take that risk. That risk appetite is not there for us. We're not going to do that. It's too dangerous for us. Now, there's pros and cons on both sides. The pros for having that risk appetite is if you've got loads of people, you can take more positions, and you can make further gains. The cons of that are, if you know your commanders have got a big risk appetite, you're not going to take risk yourself unnecessarily. You're not going to push forwards unnecessarily, because you're just going to sit back and you're going to think, I'm not moving because I want to go home. At some point, we're going to go on a crazy mission. So why am I going to go on a crazy mission myself? From the Western side of things, you're looking at this and you're thinking, right, okay, I'm a junior commander. I've got a job to do. I'm trusted. I'm going to plan a patrol either at platoon, section, company level. We're going to go out on a fighting patrol. We're just going to take it off our own back to go out on a fighting patrol. If we come back with all our guys, good. That's what our main objective will be, to come back with all our guys. So the two contexts, the Western doctrine, if you want to use it, NATO doctrine, would empower does empower junior commanders to go out there, dominate the ground, put their own attacks in, even if they're unsuccessful. The Russian doctrine kind of doesn't let that happen. It doesn't let that happen because people, wherever you are, people don't want to run into they don't want to go into these missions that they're not going to come back from. So, it kind of has, the two different effects. And we're going to find out very soon which one's best. Also on the Russian side of it, because we're focusing on the Russians a little bit today. When people say the Russians don't care about their soldiers, no, they don't. They have a bigger risk appetite. But if you're a commander and you're standing there and you're thinking, right, okay, if I take this mission, I'm going to lose all my guys, then I'm going to lose my position, then that, I'm going to have to withdraw. They're not going to do that. So, there is risk appetite there. But on the Russian side, it's just a lot greater than it is on the, on the Western side, on the NATO side. So when people say the Russians don't care about their soldiers, they do, but just not as much as, the West does. I obviously think the Western way of doing things better, empowering junior commanders to go out on patrols, empowering junior commanders to take the initiative, empowering junior commanders in senior roles. That just doesn't happen in the, in the Russian military system. Guys, I could do a whole video on this, talking about how Russian tactics compare man for man to Western tactics. But the reality is, as we're moving forward, I genuinely don't think we're going to ever see, I don't think we're going to see Western infantry taking on Russian infantry. I just don't think that's on the cards. I think there's too many complexities now. There's too many, too many avenues for asymmetric warfare. There's too many avenues for drone strikes, long-range missile strikes, artillery strikes, all this sort of stuff that you have to contextualize when you're talking about modern warfare. I just don't think we're going to see, infantry versus infantry. You may see limited special forces operations in which, Western special forces are not really, that Russian special forces are not really that special. They're just really good because most of them come from Cossack heritage, and they're really good at doing backflipping hatchet attacks and and doing somersaults through car windows. they've not. I mean, look at the Russian special forces operations that have gone in the last, in the last couple of years. They've not been really successful. But again, to counter my own argument, what do we mean successful? If we think about the the theater that came under the theater attack, I think was it this year or was it last year? I can't remember, guys, but there was a theater attack in Russia that was just handled absolutely wildly by Russian special forces. There was the other theater attack, I think, where the Russians used gas. Again, absolutely wildly handled by the Russians. I can pretty much guarantee that British special forces wouldn't have used those tactics. But again, who are we to say that that's not the tactics that they employ? And again, time's going to tell pretty soon. I don't believe, though, with the level of training that British special forces have, American special forces have, Western special forces have, I don't believe that the Russian special forces are any match for these guys, really. Talking about infantry, I don't think they're any match. And again, the Russians know this, the Soviets know this, so they're not going to want to take those battles. They're not going to want to take battles that they can lose. Again, not only are they going to lose a battle, it's going to be embarrassing. So I think we're going to see, large military movements. We're going to see a huge green conflict, where we're using mass amounts of artillery, mass amounts of indirect fire, drone strikes, the likes we've never seen. Guys, we shouldn't underestimate how these small $500 quadcopters have changed the battlefield. When I was in the military, you used to have to fire like a javelin at a tank to take it down, and you was always told that you go for a top attack because the armor is weakest on the top. So the javelin, I don't know how many millions this thing costs to develop. I don't know how many millions this thing is and it makes, but I know it's really expensive. So a top attack would pretty much guarantee a destruction of that tank. Now, what we found by actual warfare, this is not a study, this is not boffins talking about it with mathematical equations. This is real world stuff. What we found via real world stuff, and guys, for those of you who've worked in the private industry, guys, I'm going to talk about politics. I'm going to segue into politics now, and then I'm going to come back and I'll show you how these things connect. So real world stuff is always better than theoretical stuff. So when we talk about tanks and warfare, real world knowledge, real world numbers is always better than people, boffins, colonels, retired colonels, sat in an office somewhere doing thought experiments thinking, oh, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. Always. And again, you can move that over to politics. We have a situation now where we've got career philosophers as politicians. They've got no experience in real world. So the people like me who've got real world experience, doing real stuff, the people in power don't have any experience doing that. And that's the problem, because real world experience always trumps sat in a classroom with a professor and a colonel talking about what may or may not happen. So the real world knowledge we've got, and this is real from the battlefield in Ukraine, is side attack. We're talking about side attack now for tanks. So what the Ukrainians do, they try and get a small quadcopter drone, low, really moving it really slow, and then they will try and do a side attack onto a tank and take out the tracks. Once you've took out the tracks on a tank, it can't move. Once that tank can't move, you can then take out the external sensors with additional drones, with additional, long range, 50 cal sniper rifles, Barrett 50, sorry, or there's another one now. There's a few out there. You can take out the sensors. Once you've taken out the sensors and the tracks on a tank, do you really have a tank, or do you just have a piece of metal now that can fire a gun but you can't aim? So you see where we're going now. The cost now of being able to take out these big battle tanks, it's ridiculously low. And this is real world knowledge that we've got, from the actual battlefield. And people don't understand. We're still having the situation in the United Kingdom where we're using the same old system whereby industry, well, politicians are going to colonels and asking the colonels in the unit or the generals what they need for the battle. Those generals have got no experience in the fighting the current battle because their experience is fighting the last battle. So they're putting things out to industry. Industry are there to make money. They're saying, oh, well, actually, this is what we think you need. So, you know, we don't really, so the military industrial complex of the West right now, it's lagging far, far, far behind what the Russians have got. And especially, and I will say, it's lagging behind what the Ukrainians have got. Let's not forget how many British units have been up against Russian units. I know what we can say. Yes, there are British special forces operating in Ukraine. Yes, there are American special forces operating in Ukraine. Yes, this stuff is all happening behind the scenes. But what real data do the British military have to draw from? We have to take the data from the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians in this context are the leaders in fighting the Russians. I mean, guys, they've been doing it since 2014. So what else have we got? We've got Zelensky. He's come out and he said, Zelensky's asking to let Zelensky to the West. Let us hit North Korean troops in Russia. Everyone is just waiting for the North Korean military to start attacking Ukrainians. Ukraine's president says, guys, and this is what I'm hearing from multiple sources in the, I'm hearing this from multiple sources coming out of Ukraine now. You know, it seems like everybody's just waiting for this big attack that's coming. I said many, many videos ago, I said, I'm hearing from a lot of sources in Ukraine, media outlets in Ukraine, that the Russians are gearing up for a multi-pronged attack. It looks like this will happen after the US election or like the days after the US election when nobody knows who's in charge because, let's say, for example, Trump wins, but he's not been inaugurated. That means that Kamala Harris doesn't have any authority. What authority does or did Joe Biden have anyway? So it's going to take a few days at least to understand who's in charge, what's happening, and then like I keep saying, we've got this situation in the Middle East. We've got this situation in the Middle East whereby the United States have already got in bed with Israel, and they've said they're not going to abandon Israel. So while Zelensky's asking for, permission, and again, I don't even know how this thing is a thing. I thought if you gave somebody, it's like giving somebody a car and say, you can have that car, but you're not allowed to drive it. I was under, obviously I know I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that, the Ukrainians were allowed to use these weapons wherever they want. But Zelensky's coming out and he's calling for, permission to be able to strike North Koreans in Russia. I don't think this is going to happen. And I think it's the right thing to do as well. I think looking holistically on a strategic level, it's the right thing to do. Tactically, it's obviously the wrong thing to do. By tactics and strategy, we mean tactics is what's going to happen right now. Strategically is what's going to happen in the long term. So if we see a situation whereby we take out all the North Koreans in Russia, then nobody's going to know the combat effectiveness of the North Koreans. And I think that's what the West are waiting for. The West want to know how effective these North Koreans are in combat. And guys, before you say, oh, Sean, that you shouldn't be putting people's lives at risk, guess what? I've done things, from the military, and they've said, Sean, take a patrol down there. We're not sure if you're going to get shot at or not. So I've been in that line, guys. I know how these things work. And I can say that, when I was... how do I say this? Yeah, of course. So when I was a civilian contractor, we was in Baghdad, and there was a place called Route Irish. Now, Route Irish was the road from Baghdad. From the Green Zone into Baghdad. From the Green Zone in Baghdad to the Baghdad International Airport, or BIAP as people call it. So that route, people would attack that route all the time because they knew Westerners would travel that route all the time. So if you were the first guys out in the morning, there was a high likelihood that something would happen. So nobody ever wanted to be the first team out. So, I've been the first team and I've had to do that. I've just had to do that for the greater good of because if nobody goes out as the first team, nobody knows what's on that road, then that could compromise everyone. And on a bigger scheme of things, that could, that's a bad thing. Tactically, wasn't good for me. It was just one of those things you have to suck it up. But strategically, that has to happen, and somebody has to be first. You know, this information and intelligence needs to get passed back, and people need to know how these North Koreans are, you know, will act in a combat situation. So let's switch over to Iran and the Middle East, guys, because I am conscious that this video is running on. Iran's supreme leader threatens Israel and US with crushing response over Israeli attack. So again, this is rhetoric. Now, I don't know when these guys are going to attack, but it looks like they are going to attack. I don't think they're going to have, again, this is just me. So these guys must know that their long-range missile capacity, their long-range missile strikes, a lot of these long-range missiles are being intercepted. So there's a cost attached to that. There's a cost that, you know, these guys just can't keep fulfilling. So if they keep launching these long-range missile attacks, it's just going to cost them money, because I don't see the combat effectiveness of this. Now, on the Israeli side, the Israelis used F-35 fighter. Well, we don't know what the Israelis used, but I will suspect that the Israelis used F-35 attack aircraft to go and strike targets inside Iran. Now, these will be strategic strikes. I've heard a lot of people coming out saying, "Oh, it didn't do anything. It was a failure. It didn't work." Well, guys, okay. Again, you know, I'm just speculating here. I don't know what targets were struck. I can only, you know, assume from what I've read on mainstream media. So if we assume that the Israelis did strike, you know, strategic military assets, then you wouldn't get any footage of that, because the Iranians are not going to put out footage saying, "Oh yeah, look at these radar domes that have been destroyed. Look at these facilities that the Israelis struck." That's not going to happen. And the reason we don't get any camera phone footage of this is because, let's be fair, guys, if you live in the United Kingdom on the northeast coast, there are a lot of secret military, you know, facilities. How many of you have actually been up there and taken pictures of that secret military facility? I can pretty much say none of you, because there's a huge perimeter around it. It says strictly no photos. And if you go up there, your vehicle will be logged and checked. And if you start taking pictures, somebody will come out to you and say, "Hello, sweet cheeks, pass me your camera." And, you know, it just doesn't happen. So if, for example, there were to be a missile strike on the United Kingdom and it were to take out our early warning system, which is a strategic asset of the United Kingdom, there'd be no camera phone footage of that, because nobody's allowed to go up there. And those people who are in that area, they're not going to be taking pictures themselves on their camera phone and putting it on social media. So that's kind of why there's been no footage come out of Iran, you know, of what targets have been struck. Now, if we're talking about the military targets in Iran, which is kind of what the Israelis want to take out, I just don't see these things can't be taken out by conventional munitions. These things will be so deep underground, because the Iranians will have seen what overwhelming air power looks like, and they will have witnessed this, you know, I guess kind of firsthand, watching the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the overwhelming air power that just saturated Iraq in the first, what was it? I think they had like 5 days of 24-hour bombings. And guys, it was just, I mean, we were sat in Kuwait when this was happening, and guys, you know, it was just unbelievable, the air power that was going in there, the strikes, the devastation that came from the air. And that led route to, you know, an easy walkthrough when the coalition went into Iraq in 2003. Now, the Iranians will have obviously seen this, and they'll have thought, well, do you know what? I don't think, even with the might of the US Air Force, I'm laughing now, guys, because it may be the case. I don't think even with the might of the US Air Force, I don't think the US Air Force can destroy a mountain. So there's a lot of mountainous regions in Iran. I would speculate hugely that anything of their star items will have been put underground. It will be put deep underneath mountains. Now, let's not forget, when you're digging these deep underground military structures and at government level, all you need to do is dig your, initially you dig your tractors, your dump trucks, your drilling equipment, you dig that in underground, and then you can make that, you know, the entrance can be 10, 20, 30 miles away from the actual facility. So, you know, I don't think there's any way of knowing, you know, there's no way of knowing where these actual nuclear sites are in Iran. People may know, they may speculate, but the reality is I don't think anyone really knows except from the Iranians, some high-ranking Russians, and, you know, maybe BRICS allies may or may not know that. So I don't think there's any chance of the Israelis taking out the nuclear facilities in Iran by air, which leads us on to a ground invasion. A ground invasion would have to be amphibious because there is no other way of getting troops in there. The only people that have that capacity, realistically, is the United States. No one else has that capacity, and I mean globally now, guys. No one else in the world has the capacity to do an amphibious assault of another country. No one. That, you know, you need landing craft, you need naval bombardment, you need air support, you need air superiority. Nobody else has that, you know. So whereas the Israelis can do limited military incursions into Lebanon, into Gaza, these are very, very tiny incursions. You know, you need huge logistics when you're going into another country. When you go into another country, you need to take everything with you. And it's kind of like the rocket equation, whereby you need to take food, water, ammunition for your teeth arms at the front. So your fighting troops, whether that's US Marine, 82nd Airborne or whatever, you know, you need to keep those guys, you know, you need to keep those guys supplied with food, water and ammunition so they can fight. Now, the further those guys get into country, the further that supply chain is. So the more, you know, the more food, water, ammunition they need. Now, also, the people who are supplying the people with food, water, and ammunition, they need food, water, and ammunition. And the longer that supply chain gets, exponentially, you need more food, water, and ammunition. So that's the only way you can take Iran is by an amphibious assault. Right now, it would, you know, I can see that happening. I can see that happening. I'm sure that somewhere, you know, in the United States, they've got a plan for an amphibious assault into Iran. Why wouldn't you? What else has been happening? We've got Iran. We've got farmers, guys. We'll close it off with the farmers. In fact, have I shown that? Yes. We'll close it off with the farmers, guys, and I'll give you, you know, just the jux of this video. So remember at the beginning of this video, I said we've got a war on the water supply. We've already lost the war with the water supply. So, guys, you know, people are saying, what should we get ready? What should we prepare? How should we get ready for what's coming? We need to prepare to endure. We've lost the war with water. It's gone. It's finished. It's over. It's not coming back. So always get water, guys. Try and get yourselves 3 days of water per person, you know, per day. 3 liters of water per person per day. The war against farmers, we're seeing that now. We've seen it all over Europe. We've seen this in other places in the world. You know, we are having a war against our farmers. I've spotted this coming for a long time. Now, betrayed, I'll just read you the thing, guys. Betrayed farmers protest over Labour's inheritance tax rate as Chancellor insists changes are fair. I don't think these changes are fair at all, guys. You know, I think farmers who are growing our food that, you know, we eat, those guys should, you know, and again, this is not people making any extra money. This doesn't mean people are, you know, making extra money. This means that those farms, that land that is, you know, that people are farming to grow our food, if, you know, with the inheritance tax law that's changed, you know, which is essentially a 20% tax, as I understand it, on farms over £1 million. Now, one of you guys put in a comment that a combine harvester is worth, I think they put it was £375. So a combine, if you've got one combine harvester, that's a third of your farm's worth. So if you've got a combine harvester, all right, and a farmhouse, I'd say that's your £1 million up there, you know, because of where these properties usually are. They're usually, farmhouses usually are bigger. They're usually on a bigger plot. because you've got to have, you've got to have you've got to have barns, you've got to have places to bring your animals when they're out of the rain so you can process them. You can milk cows or do whatever it is you do with sheep, with cows, with livestock. You've got to have places to dry the hay. So normally a farm building is bigger. Now that's not like somebody with $1 million mansion in Surrey or something. These are literal working farms. Now, like we've just said, a combine harvester, if that's worth 375,000, I don't know if this is true, guys. This is just from your comments. A farmhouse worth 600,000. You're almost at your million there. Now, if you're looking at a few fields, £1 million isn't much for a farm, for a farm location. Now, who's going to buy this land? Remember, we saw pictures of Keir Starmer and what's his name, Bill Gates, smiley, walking down some corridors. And again, when I look at that picture, for some reason now, I always look at not symbology, but I always look at the bigger meaning. I always think, is there more to this picture than meets the eye? And a lot of the times, it's probably not. It's probably me just inventing it. But I saw people walking down the corridors of corridors, and when I see corridors, guys, I've done lots of videos, and I said, things don't happen in meetings. Things happen outside of meetings. So when people are talking, when people go for these meetings and these big political meetings, you will sit there, you will have the main political leaders, and they will sit there. Normally they don't know what they're talking about, and they're talking about a pre-arranged agenda, and the things they talk about have already been agreed with days, weeks, potentially months before they even have that meeting. And the real things that are happening, the real negotiations are happening just outside that room, maybe in a side room, in a corridor, where the aides, the attaches, the advisors, they're all together. Both of these, so say, I don't know, Putin and Trump go for a meeting. Behind the scenes, there will be Putin's guys and Trump's guys, their advisors, and they'll be talking because they have a better understanding of the knowledge that's happening in those situations. So they'll be coming to agreements, they'll be coming to negotiations, they'll be saying, right, guys, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this, can you do this? No, we can't do that. No, it's definitely a red line, that's never going to happen. And it's those guys that do the real negotiating. The political leaders, it's already done by the time those guys actually get to speak. So when I saw the picture of Keir Starmer and, what's his name, Bill Gates, walking down the corridor, I'm thinking, right, they're walking in a corridor. Is that some sort of subliminal, message to say they're making the real decisions? They're in that corridor. I don't know, guys. Maybe I'm just looking too deep into that. But why was Bill Gates here? Remember, Bill Gates is the biggest landowner in the United States. I could really see a situation now where we have this war on farmers. The government buys up all that land at an absolute discount. Or guess what? The government says we've got foreign investment coming, and this foreign investment buys up all the British land on the cheap and then starts growing whatever and putting whatever chemicals into whatever it is they're growing. And then guess what? By 2030, we're all eating bugs in 15-minute cities, and none of us are happy. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna leave it there. We've got a war on farmers at the moment. We should support our farmers. I certainly support our farmers. We live in a semi-rural location. I see how hard farmers work. They're out in the fields, they're out in the fields like daily. They're up and down in their tractors. If they're not doing that, they're cutting hedges back to try and get more sunlight on the perimeters of their fields. If they're not doing that, they're in there. They're working in the farm, working with the livestock, drying hay, looking at crops, it's hard work being a farmer. And these guys, they are what's the word I'm looking for? It seems like it seems like a lot of farmers are rich, but they're really not. They have combine harvesters worth 350 grand, but like, come on. I mean, really, are you going to see the Tate brothers driving a 350 grand combine harvester to their next party? No, of course not. These farmers don't drive Ferraris. They don't drive, expensive cars. They drive beat up old trucks. They produce food for us. And we're seeing this war on farms. We're seeing this war, a lost war on water, and we're seeing a war on accommodation right now. Nothing good, I don't feel, is coming in the next couple of years. And even if we manage to vote Labour out, who's going to be in their place? Realistically, Kemi Badenoch? Well, we've just talked about who her husband is. Nothing good is coming. I'm not a fan of I'm not a fan of Kemi Badenoch, but time, time will tell. She's not said she's going to leave the ECHR, so that's not a good thing. And even if we, but we need more draconian measures than this. So I think in one context, it's not a good thing, but I think it is a good thing because it will bring down the system quicker, and we'll be able to put a new system in place. We'll be able to put a new system of governance in place quicker now. Kemi Badenoch's in charge because nothing of any substance is going to come from anything that happens now with the Conservatives. They needed to get Jenrick in charge. Jenrick was quite a hardliner. If Jenrick would have been in charge, if they'd have voted Jenrick in, that would have been the end to reform. That would have been reform over. But they didn't, so you're going to see reform rising and rising and rising, and people erroneously will be putting their trust in reform. It's not reform as a party, guys. It's the whole system. Remember, guys, when I make these videos, I'm talking to somebody who stood for reform as, I was somebody who resigned actually from reform. I was going to stand as a reform candidate in the last election. I didn't because of the way it was run. I should probably, I'll not do a video on that, guys, because I'm not going to, I'm not going to show and tell. I would help those guys out any way I could, but it's the system, it's the political system that's broken, and it's not just broken in the United Kingdom. It's broken in the West. We've had years and years and years of ideological subversion, whereby we've got theoretical guys running the country when we need practical guys running the country. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I've waffled on for far too long. I'm going to back to grid. I'll get you guys another video later.